Good afternoon. Welcome to the last but definitely not least session of the day. This workshop is on violence against women in the Orthodox Church's response. And today we have the work of three presenters, but two presenters, which I am happy to introduce. Varvara Gulina holds a master's degree in public health. She is currently a PhD student at the University of California, San Diego and San Diego State University within the School of Social Work. Her research revolves around gender-based violence. Some of her previous work includes creating new survey items to capture women's internal abuse-related experiences more accurately. Research on women's experiences of belittlement, as well as research on Slavic trafficking victims. She informs her research through various determinants and social cultural contexts that influence women's vulnerability to victimization through the lifespan. Welcome, Varvara. She's also new to OCAMPR. But not new to OCAMPR, and also presenting second, is Dr. Philip Mamalakis, who, with his wife Georgia, have 7 children and 1 grandchild and live in Boston, Massachusetts. Dr. Mamalakis is the Associate Professor of Pastoral Care at Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology. He has a Master of Divinity from Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology and a PhD from Purdue University in Child Development and Family Studies, specializing in marriage and family therapy. Together with Father Charles Ioannidis, Dr. Mamalakis has just completed the 2nd edition of The Journey of Marriage, a resource for couples preparing for marriage in the Orthodox Church, and is the author of Parenting Toward the Kingdom. In addition to his teaching and writing, he was founding vice chair of the Assembly of Canonical Bishops of America Mental Health Task Force, and of course past president of OCAMPR. He is the author of the article, Domestic Violence, an Orthodox Pastoral Perspective, which can be found on the table in the back. Not here, but her work is here, is Dr. Helen Creticos Theodoropoulos. She is an Orthodox theologian and educator. She is currently adjunct professor of St. Sava Serbian Orthodox School of Theology and teaches the adult education program and 2 Bible studies at area Orthodox churches. She has lectured extensively on topics of Orthodox theology, practice, and spirituality. She's a good friend of mine, and I learn from her every week. She is on the board of the St. Phoebe Center of the Deaconess, is an officer of the Orthodox Theological Society in America, and is a lifelong member of Saints Peter and Paul Greek Orthodox Church in Glenview. All right, welcome, Varvara.
Thank you. Hello and welcome. Today we'll be talking to you about violence against women and the importance of Orthodox Church's response. So I'd like to begin by asking a question. Do you have a girl or woman in your life who means the world to you? Now imagine this person walking a path towards tragedy, failure, or abuse. As it turns out, approximately 1 in 3 to 1 in 4 women will experience either physical or sexual violence. And the problem is so pervasive that it is very possible that some of you watching this video have experienced it or know someone close to you. But I'd like to backtrack a little bit and tell you a little bit about myself. So I was born and raised Orthodox Christian. My father is a priest. I spent a lot of my childhood in Russia, and I have a sister who is a novice at a Greek Orthodox monastery in Pennsylvania. And also in my free time, I'm a Disney princess. And even though I grew up in what I consider to be a spiritually supportive environment, in my early 20s, I found myself in a relationship where I was subjected to different types of abuse. And in the lowest point of my life, God has saved me, and He has put me on a new path towards higher education. So I am now a PhD student at San Diego State University and University of California, San Diego, and a lot of my research and work revolves around gender-based violence, specifically also ways in which women find it difficult to understand their own experience of violence and also leaving violent relationships. So, as I was studying, a lot of the issues of women experiencing abuse within the church started to creep up. Not only my own understanding of seeing women that I've known for many years or that I've grown up with, but also new experiences where women would start coming to me and sharing what they're actually experiencing. And I really took that as a sign from God that perhaps we have a problem in the church that is not currently being addressed. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the myths and misconception of abuse and domestic violence. Oftentimes when we think about violence against women, this is what we imagine. And it's very easy for us to say we stand against violence against women. But in reality, domestic violence oftentimes looks like this. And this is because, number one, domestic violence is a hidden problem. And number two, it is not always physical. So I'd really like for us to expand on the definition of domestic violence. It can be physical, but it can also be sexual coercion, psychological harm, spiritual harm, exploitation of children. It could be financial control. And at the root cause of all of it is the need for power and control or to exert one's will over another. It is a pattern. So another myth is that if it's psychological or mental, that it's not that serious and that it's really none of our business and we should kind of sweep it under the rug or it's a family issue. And finally, the idea of stranger danger, which is that it's not happening in my parish. But the reality is not having a victim of abuse in your parish would be a miracle. So now I'd like to get into the Christian context when we're talking about abuse and domestic. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about the risk. So this is not a comprehensive list. It's also not necessarily a mutually exclusive list. And some of these factors are not also necessarily determinant. So for example, we know that pregnancy does not cause domestic violence. However, due to mechanisms that are still not well known, a woman becomes especially vulnerable to abuse when she becomes pregnant, especially if she's experienced, or the relationship has been rocky before. And now I'd like to talk to you about spiritual abuse and the warning signs. So spiritual abuse is using religious language to hide, justify, or make sense of the abuse. So with physical, when you're looking at it through a spiritual lens, oftentimes there is a conversation of martyrdom or forgiveness or being patient. Also lately, I've heard a lot using phrases such as alluding to female saints who died at the hands of the abusers. For psychological abuse, which also kind of has a myriad of ways that can be manifested, a lot of times the words such as repentance are used, again, martyrdom through marriage, death to self. With sexual abuse, it's pretty self-explanatory, but this can happen in marriages. And if through a spiritual lens, a lot of this looks like talking to the wife about the importance of her role as a Christian woman. So there's a lot of talk about obedience or submission or the emphasis on male nature and gender roles. Also, withholding sexual affection as a means of control can also fall under this category. These are some more phrases that are used. And honestly, I've met women who thought that they were going to receive crowns in heaven for being patient, and taking the abuse. So a lot of this is not only damaging to a woman's sense of self, but it's damaging to her relationship to God and therefore also her community at large. So we really need to start paying attention to this in the church. So as I was having these experiences and women were sharing all of their experiences, I thought, okay, this seems to be a big problem. I'm going to look up some numbers. I'm going to do my research and look to see what we have in the Orthodox Church. And I did find statistics and surveys. There's some in Protestant churches. I found some Anglican and Roman Catholic church statistics. Here's some more. A lot of them are quite new and they keep coming out. And then I tried finding Orthodox Christian abuse statistics. And no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't find any. So one of my mentors in the church said, well, you don't have time to conduct a full research study before OCAMPR to show numbers. So why don't you just sit down with some women and have conversations and see what they say? And so that's exactly. So before I continue, I'd like to acknowledge the brave women who spoke to me and who gave me their permission to share some of their quotes and stories with all of you today. A lot of the times their voices were silenced, either due to fears or due to forces outside of them that made it very difficult to come forward. So I'd like to honor them today by giving them a voice. So now we're going to get into a little bit into flawed church response. And oftentimes this is manifested through what is known as double abuse or secondary abuse. And this is ways in which leadership of the church or community at large responds to a victim when they come forward. So for example, they may be blamed, they may not be believed. They may be told to forgive or to be patient with his anger. One that I really want the church to pay attention to is the referral to marriage and couples counseling, because domestic violence organizations and Christian domestic violence organizations, they do not recommend this. And this is because normally when a couple is being referred to couples counseling, it increases the likelihood of harm to the victim, and so it is no longer recommended. But however, this is still being practiced in the Orthodox Church. And like I said, it's important to have trauma-informed pastoral care, and therefore I think it is important for priests really to be educated on how to be sensitive to these issues. So the first woman shared with me, she said, I've been in an abusive relationship for 9 years. There were things of sexual nature that I did not know how to explain to the priest, and that made me feel uncomfortable sharing. When I did speak out, my priest did not support me. We were referred to couples counseling. This was a very negative experience. She also said that the pressure was put on her to have her marriage blessed within the Orthodox Church. Another woman said, in confession, I expressed sexual abuse that I experienced. It was invalidated. The priest proceeded to ask me details about it. I froze. It was traumatizing. I did not receive an absolution. When I asked her relationship to the Orthodox Church, she said, I don't go to church very often. I don't feel like I have anyone that I can trust. I have contemplated leaving the church for a while. I feel very separated, spiritually, emotionally, and intellectually. But I don't want to leave. I see problems in other denominations too. So now I want to real quick give you an example at a monastery. So this woman says, when my husband strangled me, I called the police and he was taken away. In tears, I called a well-known female monastic, and after telling her what happened, she told me I was being too harsh on him before she hung up. So before this happened, she actually spoke with this monastic to get advice on the relationship. And this is what she said. She said she wanted me to get married even though I told her about the abuse. I asked for at least more time, but I was told to get married as quickly as possible because the relationship has been sexual before. I remember feeling pensive about it, but I thought that this was God's will, given her holiness and authority. So, by the way, this woman did receive services outside of the Orthodox Church. And when she did try to get a divorce, she had a lot of difficulty, particularly logistically. And so she was referred from priest to priest. And there were some priests who had said that she was unable to. I'm not really sure for what reasons. But when I had asked her about her relationship with the Orthodox Church, she stated that she really only stays Orthodox because of communion. So another woman says, I was groomed from the age of 14 into marrying a man much older than me within the Protestant church. When I turned 18, we came into the Orthodox church and our marriage was quickly blessed. The priest did not inquire about how the relationship started or even of our age difference. When I started opening up to my priest about the abuse, I was taken advantage of. Nothing was done by the church about this situation for a decade. I felt ashamed and entirely alone. So why does poor church response happen? There's a couple of reasons, but I think really one big one is this idea of our religious identity. It is extremely difficult within any church context to talk about something as stigmatizing as abuse. And because our devotion to a religious institution often shapes our social identity psychologically, whenever victims come forward, members of the religious community are often very suspicious. And so the victim or the person bringing up allegations of abuse, they may be viewed as problematic or troublemakers or as bad sources of information. Another, I think, is this idea of band-aiding the problems. So telling a woman, let's say she gets pregnant out of wedlock, and so telling her that she needs to get married as soon as possible within the church is not only going to not fix the problem, but it's actually going to further complicate her problem, and it's putting her and her baby at risk of violence. So the impacts of all of this is really far-reaching. So we know that children who grow up watching their mom and dad in an abusive relationship, they're more likely to either become victims themselves when they grow up or to become perpetrators themselves. And also there are laws concerning like a child watching domestic violence because the effects of watching your mom and dad in abusive relationships are very similar to those if the child was experiencing the abuse themselves. Also, miscarriages and other negative pregnancy outcomes are more common in women who are being abused. So things such as stillbirths or low birth weight or early delivery. PTSD symptoms can be higher in women who experience psychological and emotional abuse than even physical abuse. And this is again why I wanted to bring this up, that this isn't less traumatic for a woman if it's emotional. And finally, one of the most devastating ones, of course, is that women are leaving the church. So based on all of my research that I've done, I've kind of come up with a list of what I see a need is in the Orthodox Church in order to help solve this problem. The one that I really kind of wanted to point out and bring everyone's attention to is the female-oriented care and input. So no matter how educated or well-meaning the priest is, women need the healing presence and counsel of other women. And this is why I believe that a specially trained female diaconate, who is also accountable to the bishops and the leadership of the church, would be a perfect solution to this. Because monastics, while they have nuggets of wisdom, oftentimes they don't have the theological, pastoral, or clinical training that it requires for someone to really engage and understand a domestic violence victim. So they may not always be the best go-to for women either. I also was thinking that it would be wonderful if perhaps the mental health ministries within the Orthodox Church could create a committee or a board where this topic would be the focus, so the protection of women. We could even expand it into protection of women and children, but maybe they would explore the topic through research so that we have statistics. They would provide resources to parishes and education. And they would also come up with different policies, or they would impact policies. And it would be nice if this board was interjurisdictional, so that across the board within the Orthodox churches, there was the same understanding and updated information on abuse. It is important for me to note that I am not shedding light on this issue because I want to point fingers or condemn or scandalize the Orthodox Church. On the contrary, I deeply love my church, and I believe that we can become a shining example on how to care for women. However, we have to have humility in realizing where our weaknesses are so that we can improve. I also believe that by speaking about topics such as abuse or pornography use in the church, etc., real issues that are plaguing our church today, that we're able to heal as the body of Christ as we try to work out these issues together as a community. So I encourage everybody to take action. Please share this video with maybe someone you know who needs it in the Orthodox Church, or maybe a priest. Also, if you have a suspicion that abuse is happening in your parish, please come up and talk to your priest about it. I believe that we all have the potential to start a chain reaction and to bring awareness. And it's really important that each of us feels responsible for the community as a whole. I think this woman said it best when she says, As an Orthodox Christian woman, I shouldn't have to feel like I have to go to Saddleback Church in order to get my needs met. And by the way, she did end up going to Saddleback Church in order to get resources, to get herself some help. Um, Also, when I kind of asked about, what it is that these women would like to see, when they're experiencing abuse or if they know that someone is experiencing it, they've shared some quotes. One woman said, "It would be nice to speak to a female. You want there to be no risk. Women feel vulnerable when you come to clergy. It becomes very personal and you open yourself up to psychological and spiritual wounding when you come in as a younger woman. You tell things privately because you feel alone and because you do not have anyone else to open up to." And when I asked what, this other woman would like to see, she said a group of women in the Orthodox Church, a place where you can turn to, report things, make complaints, and be counseled by an empathetic woman. Just someone to talk to where things can be brought up. A place where there can be an intervention or an investigation if need be. So we already have an ordained ministry of the church in existence as a women's ministry, and it is no longer active, but it is still valid. It is the female diaconate. This is a ministry that clearly speaks to the needs for a woman's hands to reach and touch in places and times when a man's hands would be inappropriate and unfitting. I'm going to read you a quote from the Apostolic Constitutions here. It says, "Ordain also a deaconess who is faithful and holy for the ministration towards women. For sometimes he cannot send a deacon who is a man to the women on account of unbelievers. Thou shalt therefore send a woman, a deaconess, on account of the imaginations of the bad. For we stand in need of a woman, a deaconess, for many necessities." So I've kind of looked at different resources that the Protestant churches had, and the one that I'd really like to point out is having an outside organization do the investigation if there is an allegation of abuse, because when a church investigates itself, it is very prone to bias and inside influence, especially because the Orthodox Church is small and everybody kind of knows everyone else. And so there's a very strong possibility that bias and even covering up might happen. And so this is why it's important to have an outside organization such as Grace to come in and do an investigation that is very trauma informed, that takes care of the victim and kind of teaches the community how to properly respond. And the good thing about an organization like Grace is that ultimately it also prevents future lawsuits because the victim has been taken care of, or because in the future the community and the church knows how to respond. So it is, I think, a great option because the alternative is that lawsuits will just kind of keep popping up sporadically. So here are some other ideas. I think it would be very important if leadership within the church kind of started being more involved in this conversation. So, for example, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and so priests could maybe come up on the podium one day and give a sermon on marriage or love, and also mention the problem of domestic violence or the appropriate way to respond. Another idea is just to have ongoing conversations with young people, maybe having teen groups where they discuss topics such as dating violence or having that conversation in premarital counseling. And it would be nice if there were like extensive manuals for priests as well, so that they know how to respond. Because as I said, there's you kind of have to have specialized training to understand the myriad of ways that abuse can take place and how it plays out. And a lot of times priests just don't have the tools in order to know how to respond accurately. And full day conferences. It would be nice if men and women, for example, would come together and be on a panel and discuss their experiences of abuse. I've gone to conferences and trainings where men would talk about their experiences of rape, and I think, again, it's very important that we have a very thorough conversation and that everybody is welcome, so that we can brainstorm ideas about how to better find solutions to these problems. So if you have time, I highly recommend that you read works by Judith L. Herman, Dr. Judith L. Herman. She writes a lot on proper religious community response, and her work is very powerful, so I highly recommend it. I will read you a quote. It says, "If trauma is truly a social problem, and indeed it is, then recovery cannot simply be a private individual matter. The wounds of trauma are not merely those caused by the perpetrators of violence and exploitation. The inactions of bystanders, all those who are complicit in or prefer not to know about the abuse, or who blame the victims, often cause even deeper wounds. Reconciliation should follow only after justice has been done. This is not something survivors can do alone. It is a task that requires a new kind of commitment from a moral community." It is important for me to say that good church response does happen. So when one woman who had a bad experience with a priest actually switched parishes, this is what she said. She said, "This priest heard me. He validated me. He saved my life. It is amazing to have someone hear you and to acknowledge what has happened. He saved us." Here she was also talking about her children, and she was tearing up as she was telling me this. So speaking of proper church response, this is my spiritual father, Bishop Gerasim. He's an auxiliary bishop of Texas, and I think he is a true example of a man of responsibility, true humility, and courage, because he also saved me. And I think he's a great example for all of us of what it looks like when men empower women in the church. Jesus Christ, he empowers us to do great things. And so if priests are supposed to be representing Christ, then shouldn't they also be empowering women in the church? And so I love him very much, and I just wanted to share that with you. And when I asked you in the beginning to think of the person that means the world to you, this is the person that I think of whenever I think about the Orthodox Church. This is my daughter Vera, and she's 8 years old. And she is the person that motivates me to do the work that I do every single day. She's also very active in helping me to advocate for the well-being and safety of girls and women. So we share a purpose together. And the first purpose is to help empower girls and women. But the second one is that we like to bring joy to people. And one way we do that is we assist my father in funerals and baptisms and house blessings and visiting the sick. And my daughter is very involved in all of these different ways. Here she is making a gift for a cancer patient. We also bring our bunny Banana everywhere. And my daughter says that he has two gifts from God. One, he brings joy to others, and two, he always, always, always wins the staring contest. And this is because he doesn't blink. So she actually wanted to come with me to OCAMPR in order to present, but it couldn't be worked out because her dream is to preach and to share the gospel. And I said, you know what, maybe I could record you and you could help make a change that way. And so I did record her, and this is what she said. She says, "It's really sad when men abuse women. Men have to respect the women in the church. God didn't just make men, God made women too. And the Holy Spirit gets hurt too sometimes when the men are being mean to the women. Men have to take responsibility. They have to love the women and help them." As you can see, she's very well spoken, and I'm very proud of her. So I'd like to conclude by saying thank you to Dr. Helen Theodoropoulos and Dr. Philip Mamalakis for their mentorship and oversight over this project and this presentation. I really deeply appreciate all of their help and all of their efforts. Thank you all so much.
So hospitality speaks to the loving care and welcome of those who are strangers and wanderers, providing refuge and even a home. And this is what God does for us in Christ. He reaches out to the fallen we who are strangers in God, to restore us to our true home and to share in his life. Christ offers his infinite love and care to us through his church, especially through prayer, worship, fellowship, and sacramental life. The sacraments enact the sacred hospitality of God. So actually, she used some other quotes from the women that I'd interviewed when we asked them like what they want to see. And so one woman said, "It would be nice to speak to a female. You want there to be no risk. Women feel vulnerable when you come to clergy. It becomes very personal when you open yourself up to psychological and spiritual wounding when you come as a younger woman. You tell things privately because you feel alone and because you do not have anyone else to open up to." And another one said that a group of women in the Orthodox Church, a place you can turn to, report things, make complaints, and be counseled by an empathetic woman. Just someone to talk to, where things can be brought up. A place where there can be an internal investigation, if need be. We're talking about how the female diaconate could help fill this gap, because we already have an ordained ministry within the church, and it clearly speaks to the need and the needs of other women. And so I'm just going to read this quote. "Ordain also a deaconess who is faithful and holy for the ministrations towards women. For sometimes he cannot send a deacon who is a man to the women on account of unbelievers. Thou shalt therefore send a woman, a deaconess, on account of the imaginations of the bad. For we stand in need of a woman, a deaconess, for many necessities." I think here she wanted to point out the many different resources we have for women in our liturgical life. And I think Dr. Mamalakis will speak a little bit about this, but how a lot of these words can be distorted, and like what the real meaning behind them is. And I really love that she has this saint up here, because I've actually had a woman come to me and say that she appeared to her in her dream whenever she experienced abuse within the church. And she is well known to have served women who were abused. So the steps to consider, the restoration of the female diaconate, also making use of the skills of dedicated lay women, but I think it needs to be probably more organized, where women would know that they have someone there in their parish specifically for those needs. Admitting our failures, something I touched on before, whether secrecy, shame, cultural pride, and raising awareness. Yes, training our priests. I know Dr. Mamalakis said that there's some pastoral trainings in certain seminaries. I don't know how widespread it is. I don't know if the priest education gets updated, but I definitely agree that if the men, the seminarians, the priests are going to be in positions of authority, that they need to have more knowledge about, like I said, have more of a trauma response. Well, there are some resources. They're not many, but I found one in the Greek Orthodox Church, and it's a manual for domestic violence. I think one of the problems is that they're not disseminated very well. So I don't know many priests who would know this is a resource. So perhaps part of the job is to make sure that we're actually disseminating information. And yeah, I guess Dr. Mamalakis is going to speak next. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Varvara. At the heart of marriage is hospitality, sacred hospitality, and a healing encounter. In fact, I would suggest that marriage, in many ways, is the most sacred hospitality, the most sacred type of relationship that is described as hospitality, and can be potentially the most healing encounter. At the heart of marriage is hospitality, and at the heart of hospitality is the heart. Vulnerability and openness. Because when we're talking about hospitality, it's really about vulnerability. There's a need for someone. Someone has a need. In many ways, the hospitality of marriage is very similar to or reflects just hospitality. someone has a need, that's vulnerable. Someone is vulnerable. And then to welcome them into our homes is an act of vulnerability. It's openness. It requires a recognition of a need and sharing, and the host opening up and making him or herself vulnerable. And we see that at the heart of marriage is this type of invitation to vulnerability. In fact, it's beautiful because it's an openness to the stranger. And who is that stranger in marriage? Well, it's discovering who our spouse is on this journey and discovering who we are on this journey. And in many ways, all of that marriage path can be understood as that process of hospitality, of acquiring a hospitable heart toward the stranger that you just happen to be married to. In fact, in many ways, listening is an act of hospitality. Hospitality requires the capacity to welcome someone into our home and not comment on all their faults and the funny way they dress and all the things doing wrong. Hospitality requires a type of non-judgmentalness, a type of receptivity. That is this intimacy in marriage. But this path of hospitality in marriage adds a path of vulnerability and intimacy, heart to heart, can be pretty scary. That is a normal experience on this path of marriage. But it's not, I'm afraid for my life. The normal fear of this journey is I'm afraid of maybe seeing myself. I may be afraid of admitting that I did something wrong. I may be afraid that I have to give up what I want. Or maybe I'm afraid because I don't know what's coming down the road. It is not a fear of being close to this person. So while a certain type of fear is really appropriate, when someone is afraid for their life, that's not sacred hospitality. That's something different that demands a different response. The stranger can be threatening. You don't know what that person you just invited into your home will do. In fact, the host can be threatening. The stranger can always be threatening. And on this journey of marriage, it can be pretty threatening. That's a really appropriate thing to experience. But the threatening of a normal, sacred hospitality is this person is threatening what I want to do. This person is a threat to me getting my way. This person is a threat because their family does something that my family, and now I have to change. In many ways, the healthy, sacred hospitality represents a threat to how I saw the world. And now I'm challenged. In order to love, I need to change. That's really appropriate. That's sacred hospitality. But when my life feels threatened, when I feel physically threatened, that's not sacred hospitality. Forgiveness. As we engage in this sacred hospitality of marriage, within sacred hospitality, we're going to react, we're going to make mistakes, we're going to say things we shouldn't have said, we're going to discover, we have things we have to learn. I'm going to be impatient, I'm going to react. You're going to discover in your spouse, you got to be more patient, you got to react. And then your partner takes responsibility, says, that's not okay what I did, and says, next time I'm going to try and be more patient. And it's really appropriate within sacred hospitality to forgive. In fact, there is no path of marriage without forgiveness. Inevitable mistakes, inevitable hurts, saying the wrong thing. That's really critical on this sacred path of hospitality. But when someone has threatened me, when I'm fearing for my life, suddenly while forgiveness is still true, in order to reconcile and to continue on any sort of path of sacred hospitality, there needs to be a real sense of taking responsibility and a real type of intentional addressing of that issue. So while forgiveness is critical, when violence, physical violence, psychological violence, emotional violence, control and manipulation is there, forgiveness remains freeing for everyone, but reconciliation actually requires I need to learn to engage in a different way. If someone enters your house and they destroy all the furniture, it's really appropriate to forgive them and not let them back into the house until something is different. So forgiveness is critical within sacred hospitality. But when we see signs of this violence, reconciliation requires actually naming, addressing, and doing a real type of repentance that we call a change of direction. Humility is really important in sacred hospitality. Considering the needs of others as more important than your own. That's sacred. Paying more attention to attending to the needs of others is really critical. And along with that, this path of self-denial. To freely choose as an offering to put someone else's needs before your own, that's a beautiful aspect. That is the path of merit of sacred hospitality. Yet that is freely chosen. I know what I'm giving up, and I am choosing to surrender my need because I know and believe there is something greater than me getting what I want. And it is a free offering. And when I choose self-denial, I choose self-denial as a gift that I give, as an offering to God and to my spouse. Paradoxically and mysteriously, in this sacred encounter, I feel better. I feel more connected. It nurtures intimacy. Self-denial and humility are what happens to us on this path of sacred hospitality. Yet when I am forced to do that, it is imposed on me. I have to do it, and I can't express what I think or what I'm giving up, and it is no longer free. It is no longer a choice. It is more taken from me. That is neither sacred nor hospitality, and we know that that is not only not life-giving, but destructive. And we see the fruit of sacred self-offering as growth and intimacy. But it's hard. It's ascetic. It is a type of martyrdom. Yeah, the martyrdom of sacred hospitality is, I don't get what I want. I don't get my way. It is really hard to freely, as a gift, give up my way. But when I choose to die to what I want to do, the way I think things should be, what I think is right, because I believe there's something even greater, because I recognize that something's happening, and I choose to offer freely, I feel strangely free, I feel strangely connected, I feel full. That is sacred humility, sacred self-offering, sacred martyrdom. And that's beautiful. When someone forces me, when I don't have a voice, when I am no longer free, and I feel trapped, and I feel like I'm not thriving, I'm walking on eggshells. That type of entrapment That's not martyrdom. So what we see is, I want to talk about patience too. Yes, patience is a critical part of sacred hospitality. If you ever had company in your home, you know that patience is important. And if you've ever been married, this journey of marriage, of sacred hospitality, but that's the patience of allowing your spouse to learn, allowing yourself to learn. That's the patience of recognizing that we wait on God to act. That's different than enduring something that you know is wrong, enduring something that's destroying. And the fruit of godly patience is intimacy and connection. And the evidence of it is that I have a voice. But when quote-unquote patience is imposed as a cover to justify and excuse sin, we see the fruit of that is I'm not thriving. It's dehumanizing when it's forced and imposed. Submission. What role does submission play in sacred hospitality? Well, it's beautiful because at the heart of hospitality is submission. When you're hosting someone, you ask them how they're doing. You're attending to them. When you welcome someone in their house, you don't do all the talking. You don't make it all about yourself. You submit yourself to the guest. What can I get? At the heart of marital sacred hospitality is a free choice to attend, to submit. But we see within sacred hospitality, we know who are we hosting when we host the stranger. We're hosting Christ. And when we submit to one another freely as a choice, offering to submit, we recognize it's as unto the Lord. And on this journey of sacred hospitality, who is called to submit to one another as unto the Lord? Who is called to follow Christ? We see within the Orthodox Church an equality of the sexes. And in our wedding ceremony, the woman doesn't follow the man. They're side by side, led by Christ. And submission, sacred submission, free, chosen. I know what I'm giving up because I know something is more beautiful. Strangely, I find intimacy, connection, and life for both a husband and a wife. And to whom? To Christ. It is not imposed. It is not forced. It is not taken from me. And when couples struggle on this journey of giving up what I want to do, and each of them reacting at each other, it's really good to go talk to someone. That's a pretty appropriate thing. But when there's such a distortion of the dynamic, where one person has imposed himself, in this case with intimate partner violence, it's most commonly the male who, in that fear of being threatened, right? A healthy threatening is normal, but threatened by a female who has a voice because she's not a slave or an object, and when there's distorted beliefs and the reaction is to crush, there's no space for couples therapy to talk. This is about freeing someone and creating a space outside of that relationship to restore someone's voice, to restore someone's capacity to choose, to restore someone's capacity to offer. And prayer. I want to talk about love hurts, right? Love is painful. Yeah, what's painful about love? Well, what's painful is it's really hard to listen to your husband when he's annoying and your wife when she goes on and on. It hurts when you just want to relax and she wants to stay up, or she asks you to do one more thing and you're like, I don't really want to do this. That really hurts. All right, I don't want to over-dramatize, but it does hurt. Love hurts because I have to give up my way. If it's easy, it's not love. Love hurts, but the hurt is kind of that dying to the old man, that giving up my way, and that's painful. And the more indulgent you were raised, the more painful it's going to be learning to come up with our way. And the only physical pain, have kids, and you have to get up in the middle of the night and take care of them. And the only bruise you should feel is maybe if the backpack is a little heavy on your body. But love doesn't hurt physically. We don't distort that. That is not the hurt from sacred hospitality and this path of intimacy. So as you see, I think it's easy for someone to hear this language of submission, of obedience, forgiveness, and to say, well, but what we see is when it's taken out of its context of free choice, voice, persons, equality, it becomes subject and distorted. But the symptoms of sacred hospitality are people feel free, strengthened, intimate, and connected. So when someone comes in and talks about their struggles, in sacred hospitality, they're struggling, and you get a sense, and they're trying to be patient, and they leave feeling connected. Or after a week, they feel more connected. But when we see in the distortion of the violence, psychological, emotional, physical, sexual, manipulation, it's because it's nothing to do with hospitality, and there's nothing sacred about it. And we can use sacred language to essentially perpetuate this type of distortion. So this is the martyrdom of marriage, sacred hospitality. And in many ways, we see with domestic violence that the true act of love is actually to lead, is to stand up. And what we need as a church is to recognize that the goal is to teach and guide couples through the real struggles, asceticism, self-denial, submission, prayer, of sacred hospitality. But have the ears and the heart to discern, to recognize when this is not hospitality and it's not sacred. And I appreciate having a workshop where we can draw attention. And to me, as an Orthodox marriage counselor, to know how beautiful sacred hospitality is. To see it distorted to something we would call like demonic and evil is really a distortion of really beautiful and sacred hospitality. Thank you very much.
Now, we don't have much time, but I was thinking we can do a little bit of brainstorming together. So I'm going to just reconnect real quick. So just based on my research in different Protestant churches and the different organizations that they have on this topic and what they strive to do, I came up with more ideas. And you can kind of read through them real quick, but what I really wanted to do is if you could talk to someone next to you, could be one person or two other people, and either off this list or something else that you can think of, what you think would be a good response within the Orthodox Church, maybe some ideas for possible solutions, and then maybe we can all have a conversation together about what your ideas are, so that it's more of a community involvement. So you can take a couple minutes to do that. Thank you. Okay, we can come back now. Maybe we could raise hands if you want to share some of the things that you came up with as possible responses within the church or possible solutions. So if anyone wants to share, yes, please.
Well, a couple of things came out in our group. One, we really resonated with the women-to-women ministry. That would be important in the parish. But we also suggested the idea of legal help, that a woman, and whether it's an intimate relationship or not, the example I gave was a young woman in our parish who was pressured to date. The other male young adult pressured her to date, and she didn't want to, and this escalated to harassment and stalking, and she was encouraged to report this to the police. She did, got a restraining order. You may or may not be aware, usually restraining orders are temporary until you can prove. She got a permanent restraining order because she had text evidence of the escalation threatening to rape and hurt her because she wouldn't date him. Anyway, and so the second point, not only legal help, well, first point was in the parish, woman-to-woman help. Second point is legal help. And the third was our priest banned this young man from the parish, which was excellent. You know, he could go to another parish. But this helped the young woman feel more secure, that he was not welcome there. He certainly advised him spiritually, but it was, you can't come here anymore. So that's spiritual intervention by the priest that I think should be
Yes,
important.
thank you so much.
Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. And I think it does really depend on the priest, which is why I think there was more consistency across parishes about, like, if priests had, let's say, like a manual that they can refer to, like, in all of their offices, I think at least there will be like a consistent understanding. And I really love that example, that he was being protective of this young woman.
Can I say one thing?
I love that example too.
I just want to really quickly comment on that, and that is pointing out dating violence.
Yes.
There's new data coming out about the increased rates of violence in dating relationships, and there are patterns of young people not mature enough entering very deeply. The relationship does something normal. It ends, and they're not really emotionally equipped or socially supported enough. And I think it's important to name that. When we talk about intimate partner, it's not always adults, and it's increasingly dating relationships.
Yeah, this wasn't even a dating relation. It was, you know, he wanted to date her, and she said no, but look how it escalated. So.
I love what you said. I just had one concern, and that was he couldn't go to our church, but he went to another church.
Right.
Because that's the same thing we have with some clergy. In some churches, they just move the clergy to some other place, and so
Yes.
what do we do about that?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because I also knew of a situation when someone was arrested, and it had something to do with minors, and I think they even found child pornography. But this person, he was never convicted. And so when he did go to one parish, because there were people that knew this that felt uncomfortable, they had to leave. And so I know that he was escorted at one point, but then he did find loopholes, and this is why I was talking about policy, because he did find a parish, and you know, the priest believes that he's like changed and all of that, but I think we really need, like you said, legal aspects or policy so that we're very clear, because we can put others at risk. So thank you for saying that. Please.
Yeah, we probably don't want to hang out here terribly long in terms of priests, but as a priest, I will simply say, I hope that since I left seminary, I want to hope that our pastoral formation has improved. But I will say, and I think I said this here at this conference about other issues, that the idea of pastoral formation is just continues to be an issue that I hear as I experience people coming out of seminary, new to the priesthood, and the complaints of priests and the difficulties of the pastorate, the priesthood, and the what I experience is the lack of information and publication about what it means to be a pastor. It's very easy to be nice and to serve a liturgy.
Yeah.
It's not easy to stand in front of the lion and the wolf and
That's
the
right.
bear and protect your people. And so I think that my wife gave a seminar or a day retreat for women at Holy Nativity Monastery in Kent, in one of those, Texas. And there's just tons of women there. And a couple of the spiritual father of the monastery, Father John Anderson, who was attached to the altar in Dallas, happened to stick around just because. And my wife is very, very blunt about women's issues and the lack of attention to those in the Orthodox Church. And she said that poor man's eyes were like saucers, like the whole time she was talking, because she was very, very open about just what women experience. And that men in general and priests in particular don't understand what women experience. That's a tautology by now. I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
and we don't talk about it at the seminary, and nobody, I remember now even in my class on confession, somebody would be like the guy in the hot seat in some seminary and is standing there, and then the professor of the class was acting as though he was the penitent, and he confesses this thing, and they were all men's issues.
Yes.
So in terms of what do you do with a woman in confession, like, we don't know. men.
Right. Well, I think, even Jesus Christ had a different approach to women than he did to men. And in confession, if the priest is representative of Christ, I do find that sometimes they'll be given advice that's very similar advice that they'll give to a young man. And it's, in their mind, from their perspective, this is what helps them, right? But women may have an entirely different situation that they don't fully understand. And also the way that Jesus Christ, empowers us to be great. I think of clergy as representative of Christ, that they also need to empower women in that sense and free them, and also advocate for them, because it's really up to the priests and the men in order to help bring solutions to this, because they are in places of authority, and there's only so much that we as women can do. Like, we can do presentations, but I think it's important that we work together, but also that men understand that, again, if we want to keep women in the church, this is really vital. So.
I concur with that, and I wanted to say so thank you.
Can I respond? Yes. So I know some people who teach pastoral care at seminaries. A couple of things. I know. That's okay. Seminary is oftentimes not the place because they're overwhelmed. They're not in a place to understand, right? This is, number one, this is stuff for ongoing awareness and information. To recognize that you can't cram everything into a degree program. That's not really how you learn. Number two, sometimes these seminarians are formed in an authoritarian type of culture. And that's not a woman issue, that's an authority issue. And if you are treated a certain way, and that's how you are treated, how are you going to treat people? So OCAMPR as an organization is like an image of church, in my understanding. That we have leaders, they're pretty strict, but they're not authoritarian. And leadership empowers everyone. Again, it's these little hallmarks of sacred hospitality. The fruit of sacred hospitality, the fruit of sacred leadership is you feel heard, you feel empowered, you're learning, and you're following. So the second thing is there's oftentimes a culture of that. So what I see is this is organizations like OCAMPR getting this word out, giving voice to everyone from whatever authority you find yourself, and creating that space as an ongoing response.
Please.
As you mentioned leadership, that's where my head goes to, because we need two things happening at the same time. We do need bottom up, but we also need top down. Like, we have to be able to come into meeting places. And one of the things that I thought, we're pan-Orthodox here, but I'm within the Greek Archdiocese, so I think about His Eminence Theodoropoulos and putting, like, maybe even if the Assembly of Bishops could put like something on the website that has to do with personal violence, or maybe an 800 number that is an anonymous number so that they can get plugged in. But not just there, but that he would go to the bishops with the diocese and say, you need to put this on your diocese websites. And then they go to their churches and they say, you need to put this on your church websites. So that we have, because I know these numbers exist, these anonymous numbers. Now, this only deals with violence, but this is a beginning.
Absolutely, and I think it also communicates to women that that we care about her. And even this is why response. When we don't do things like that, when there isn't courage to, as a community, stand up to something like this, a lot of times the abuser gets enabled. And again, when he's in a religious setting, it only adds fuel to fire. And so it's very important to send. It's called. It's escaping me right now. Expose and oppose. And it's actually very healing for victims when they see that, let's say a priest comes up on the pulpit and he gives a talk on this or something like that. Or like you said, having information on website. I think it's going to give victims a sense that they're cared for and that they can slowly get back into church. Because again, people's experience, even if the sacraments get tainted. And honestly, to me, it almost feels criminal because as a church, we should never really be allowing this. And so I absolutely agree with you. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you. Nice presentation. And very appropriate. I was coming at this from maybe another resource. The Antiochian Men is an organization within the Antiochian Archdiocese that has been started from actually our St. Nicholas parish in Springfield, or in Springdale. And there is a fair amount of protectiveness amongst our men that I think we could very much engage for their spouses and for dating and for an opportunity for engagement. I think if you're looking for a place where some of that education could take place in a local parish, there is, for us at least, and maybe there is in other dioceses, an organization for disseminating this kind of information. And that takes, the priest is involved, the deacons are involved, but it's more organic amongst the men, and it might just be a target.
That's a great thing for a men's ministry.
Okay.
Our voices.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Oh, good. Okay, so I think that wraps it up. Thank you so much for coming and to
Thank you both.